In the desolate caverns, a cacophony of panicked voices echoed among the goblins. One cried out that their chief was dead. His pronouncement met with a chorus of agreement. Another, seizing the moment of chaos, boasted loudly that the chief's weapon now belonged to him, his voice eager and triumphant. Amidst the frantic scramble, a goblin stood triumphantly over the fallen, larger form of their previous chief. With a crude club hoisted high, the victor declared himself the new leader, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. However, his claim was immediately challenged by another goblin, who scoffed at the assertion, deeming it utter nonsense. The fragile peace of the cavern shattered, replaced by the primal urge for dominance. The challenge quickly escalated into a violent confrontation. One goblin, with a furious snarl, lunged forward, proclaiming himself the new chief. Another, equally enraged, roared a defiant curse, while a third let out a chilling, maniacal laugh as the battle for leadership began. The crude cavern became a battleground for their brutal power struggle. The struggle for dominance consumed the goblins in a chaotic brawl. They clawed and bit at each other, their bodies contorting in a desperate fight to become the new leader. The ground shook with their ferocious clashes, a testament to the savagery inherent in their kind. As the skirmish raged, two goblins, observing the chaos from a darker recess of the cave, conversed in hushed tones. One pointed out that the deceased chief had left some untouched prey behind and suggested they go reclaim it. The other, however, cast a wary glance deeper into the shadows, warning that the creature guarding the prey was about to return. Deep within the shadows, a cloaked, humanoid hand subtly stirred, hinting at Lin Tian's presence. Lin Tian emerged from the darkness, his cloaked figure moving with an unnatural grace that set him apart from the common goblins. He looked like an evolved version of their kind. A crowd of smaller, more primal goblins watched him with glowing red eyes, identifying him as the one guarding the prey. They muttered amongst themselves, calling him a disgusting creature for covering his body like a human. They suspected he knew where the prey was and intended to keep it for himself. Undeterred by their murmurs, Lin Tian continued deeper into the cavern's shadowy depths. Behind him, a chorus of goblin voices decided to follow. They declared their intention to take the prey away, their glowing red eyes piercing the gloom, fixed on Lin Tian's retreating form. In a quieter corner, two goblins debated their next move. One suggested they wait a little longer, noting that some of their brethren had already gone ahead to find the prey. The other, acknowledging the toughness of those vanguard goblins, hesitated, suggesting that once a fight broke out, they might just retreat. Hidden from their sight, Lin Tian cursed under his breath, sensing the escalating danger. Suddenly, a wave of desperate cries tore through the cavern. Kelia, her voice trembling with terror, screamed for help, pleading with unseen attackers to don't touch me. Her frantic pleas echoed as she was dragged mercilessly across the rough cave floor, her eyes wide with fear. Kelia's desperate struggle intensified as multiple goblins began tearing at her clothes. Her voice rose to a horrified shriek, declaring that she did not want to give birth to goblin children. From a distance, Lin Tian, his face etched with grim determination, yelled for the goblins to stop, unable to bear witness to her suffering any longer. Surrounded by a ravenous horde of goblins, Kelia's clothes were ripped further, leaving her vulnerable and exposed. Her terrified eyes darted around, begging, "Help me, and please, save me," as the monsters pressed in. Lin Tian, now fully visible, confronted the aggressive goblins. His voice, tinged with a newfound authority, cut through the clamor as he commanded them to, "You guys, let her go." The goblins snarled at Lin Tian, recognizing him and sneering, "It's you again, this freak." They reminded him that their chief was dead and defiantly claimed Kelia as their own prey, holding her pinned down. One particularly aggressive goblin glared at Lin Tian, threatening him, "If you dare take my prey, then—" Before the goblin could finish its threat, A primal roar erupted from the horde. A torrent of goblins lunged at Lin Tian, their voices melding into a single, bloodthirsty chant. Die! Kill him! Lin Tian, now locked in combat, deftly parried a goblin's lunge with his crude stone blade. He cursed internally, recognizing the unexpected challenge even from these low-level goblins, his face a mask of fierce concentration. Despite being outnumbered, Lin Tian fought with a desperate ferocity. He pushed back against the relentless assault, his resolve hardening. He swore to himself that he could not die here, his determination fueling every strike and parry. He asserted that he had to survive. With a series of swift, brutal movements, Lin Tian wielded his stone blade. He moved with an almost unnatural speed, slashing through the attacking goblins, leaving several lifeless forms crumpled on the cavern floor. Lin Tian continued his desperate fight. As he delivered a final, fatal blow to one goblin, he commanded die. He realized the urgency of his situation, acknowledging that if he didn't leave, his chances of survival would dwindle. Witnessing Lin Tian's ferocity and the sight of his weapon, the remaining goblins let out cries of alarm. They panicked and scrambled away, shouting to each other, "Run! He has a weapon!" Lin Tian watched them flee, a slight grimace on his face as he urged them. "Just wait." A silent promise of future retribution. Kelia, her body trembling but her spirit buoyed by rescue, cautiously approached Lin Tian. "Hey, Goblin, are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for saving me again." She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and continued, "You didn't harm me and kept protecting me. You really are a different kind of goblin." Tears welled in her eyes as she pleaded, "Please don't die." Lin Tian's mind replayed Kelia's words, "A different kind of goblin." His perception of reality rippled as glowing lines of code and fragmented text flickered around him, signaling the system's activation. He realized with a profound understanding that he was once a human too. One of the goblins, who Lin Tian had fought earlier, observed him, surprised that he was still alive. Lin Tian's internal monologue continued, revealing his past. He recounted being hit by a dump truck, and, instead of meeting God, he was transported to another world with the system. He acknowledged, however, that despite having the system, it had not yet fully activated. Lin Tian, still with the system's ethereal glow around him, noted that beyond seeing some basic stats, the system didn't seem to have any other functions yet. He reflected on the past few days, admitting that he hadn't been idle. From Kelia's accounts, he had gained a foundational understanding of this new world. His thoughts deepened as he recalled Kelia's descriptions of the world. He understood that it was created by gods and was populated by various powerful monsters. This knowledge painted a vivid, formidable picture of the new reality he inhabited. Lin Tian further elaborated on his newfound understanding, noting that humans had carved out their place on this continent with their strength. But then his thoughts turned grim, contrasting their power with his own low standing. He lamented that the goblin he had reincarnated as was the weakest and most filthy monster in this world. Lin Tian acknowledged his own profound weakness. His stats were really low, so much so that even among goblins, he concluded, he could be easily killed. A status screen appeared before him, starkly displaying his meager abilities. Name, Lin Tian. Race, Goblin God's Blessing. Level, LV5 class. None. HP, 20/20th Strength, 5 Defense, 5 Racial Skill, Gene Devour Equipment, Rough Stone Knife, Overall Combat Power, 30. A new thought surfaced in Lin Tian's mind. There's a way to get stronger. His gaze unconsciously drifted towards Kelia, and he mentally completed his thought, and that's to mate with these girls. Lin Tian then delved into the unique biology of goblins. He explained that they have the ability to get stronger through constant mating and reproduction, but they have no females. Consequently, he elaborated, to reproduce, they can only mate with other female creatures, which directly explained why they constantly plunder. He paused, the moral implications of this fact weighing heavily on him. Lin Tian's human past gnawed at him. He reflected on his former life, acknowledging that doing such things is really. He couldn't finish the thought, sitting in somber contemplation, wrestling with the monstrous instinct now ingrained in his new form. Kelia sat nearby, unaware of his internal struggle. Observing Lin Tian's pensive mood, Kelia tried to reassure him. "Hey, don't worry," she said, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. "After spending these days with you, I understand now." She continued, "You are very different. You don't really want to live with these goblins, right?" Lin Tian remained silent, lost in his thoughts as Kelia, with a hopeful smile, continued speaking. She promised that when the Night Order comes to rescue her, she would inform them that he had saved her. With unwavering faith, she asserted that the Night Order is always fair and just and would definitely agree to let you live in the village. Lin Tian considered Kelia's words, a glimmer of strategy forming in his mind. He silently conceded that she's not wrong. He reasoned that even if the system couldn't activate immediately, as long as he held out until the humans came to rescue them and gain their protection, he could survive first and then slowly figure out how to activate this system. He saw a temporary path to safety. Suddenly, a primal roar alerted Lin Tian. His eyes snapped open in alarm. "Damn it! Those goblins are coming back," he exclaimed, his voice urgent. He quickly told Kelia, "Hide first." Kelia, startled but trusting, responded, Okay, and quickly moved to conceal herself. A fresh wave of goblins burst into the cavern, their eyes burning with lust and greed. One of them roared, Human is here. I want to mate." Another, driven by the core goblin instinct, chanted, "Getting stronger means not getting killed." Their crude philosophy fueled their predatory pursuit. As a goblin lunged forward, its eyes fixated on the human prey, Lin Tian burst from his hiding spot. With a swift, precise movement, he slashed his stone blade across the goblin's neck, silencing its cries instantly. The goblin fell, its life extinguished. Lin Tian, a grim satisfaction on his face, looked at Kelia and informed her, "Hey, it looks like the humans are here to rescue you." Kelia's eyes widened with hope as she asked, "Really?" Kelia's face transformed from fear to sheer elation. "It must be the Holy Order," she exclaimed, her voice filled with joyous anticipation. "Great, let's go check." She started to rush towards the cave entrance, oblivious to any lingering danger. As Kelia hurried forward, a blinding flash of light blue energy erupted from the cave entrance. A powerful sword QI slash tore through the air, instantly obliterating several goblins that were just entering. It was Loader, the human swordsman, already engaged in a brutal fight against the monster horde. Lin Tian, concealed but watching intently, stared with wide, startled eyes as Loader effortlessly cut through the goblins. The human warrior's raw power left him momentarily speechless, a stark reminder of the immense strength disparity in this world. Loader stood over the fallen goblins, his posture radiating both power and annoyance. "Damn it, these filthy creatures," he muttered, inspecting a slight tear in his uniform. "They tore my Holy Order uniform." A status window appeared, displaying his formidable stats. Name, Loader race, human level, LV-25 class, swordsman, HP, 200/200, strength, 30, defense, 50 skills, sword QI/sword dance, holy skill, sword return to heaven, equipment, judgment sword, platinum armor, overall combat power, 400. Lin Tian, still hidden, processed Loader's incredible statistics. His mind reeled. It's the first time I've seen such high stats since I came here, he thought, a sense of awe and apprehension mixing within him. Is this really a human? Kelia, overjoyed at seeing her rescuer, rushed towards Loader. "Commander, we are here," she called out, relief flooding her voice. Lin Tian, observing the swift and brutal efficiency of the human warrior, noted internally, they easily dealt with those goblins. Suddenly, a chilling realization struck Lin Tian. His eyes widened in horror, and he yelled, "No, wait!" But it was too late. Loder, his face grim and determined, swung his glowing blade, aiming it directly at Kelia, who looked up, her expression a mask of pure terror. In a desperate blur, Lin Tian lunged forward, pushing Kelia out of the path of Loder's deadly attack. "Watch out!" he screamed, his voice raw with urgency. The sword's deadly arc narrowly missed Kelia, as both she and Lin Tian tumbled to the ground. Kelia and Lin Tian lay sprawled on the dusty cave floor, having narrowly escaped Loder's lethal swing. The force of Lin Tian's push and the near miss left them shaken and disoriented. Lin Tian, recovering from the impact, looked at Kelia and then back at Loder, utterly bewildered. Aren't they here to rescue people? Why are they attacking? He wondered aloud. A terrible thought then crossed his mind. Is it because the cave is too dark, and they mistook this girl for a goblin? Loder stood impassively, his sword glowing faintly. His pride seemed more wounded by Lin Tian's interference than by any goblin. "It's a disgrace that a goblin dodged my attack," he muttered, his tone cold and disdainful. Kelia, shaken but defiant, desperately called out to Loder, trying to make him understand. "Commander, it's me. I'm Kelia," she cried, her voice strained with desperation. Loder turned his head slightly, his gaze unwavering and devoid of compassion. "Shut up, Kelia," he commanded, his voice firm and final. "I know it's you." Loder's words were a cold, brutal judgment. He declared that Kelia had been defiled by goblins and might even be carrying a goblin spawn. His tone hardened further as he dismissed her pleas, calling her a filthy thing and deeming it ridiculous for a filthy thing like you to expect mercy from me. He ordered her to go repent your sins to the great Holy Mother. Kelia, tears streaming down her face, clung to Loder's arm, her voice rising in a desperate plea. "Commander, wait. Although I was captured, I wasn't defiled by the goblins." She then turned and pointed a trembling finger at Lin Tian. "It was him," she exclaimed, hoping to prove her innocence by revealing her protector. Kelia looked up at Loder, tears in her eyes as she pointed to Lin Tian and insisted, "This goblin protected me." She desperately hoped her testimony would change Loder's cruel judgment. Loder ripped his arm away from Kelia, his face contorted in a sneer of contempt. "If you're going to make up stories, at least make them believable," he scoffed, clearly beyond reason. "Do you take me for a fool? Go meet your end with these lowly creatures." He raised his sword once more, prepared to strike. Lin Tian watched Loder's unyielding cruelty with disbelief, thinking, "I can't believe it." Knowing there was no changing Loder's mind, he grabbed Kelia and frantically urged her, "Run. There's an exit that way. Get out of here." Loder swung his sword again, a powerful, determined strike aimed at Lin Tian. Lin Tian dodged the attack, his expression grim. He realized with a bitter internal thought, "I didn't expect this outcome." His plan to use the humans for protection had gone horribly wrong. Just as Loder pressed his attack, a brilliant golden light pierced through the cave's opening, illuminating the dark interior like a sudden dawn. Ephraia, the holy maiden, descended into the cave, her form radiating divine grace. She extended a hand, and the golden light coalesced around Lin Tian, forming a protective, ethereal prison that suspended him. "Wait, Loder," she commanded, her voice calm but firm. Ephraia stood tall, a serene and powerful presence. She observed Lin Tian, who was still encased in the shimmering golden light. "This goblin seems a bit strange," she mused, her gaze analytical. Kelia, seeing Ephraia, scrambled forward with renewed hope. She crawled towards the Holy Maiden, crying out, "Holy Maiden, save me, Holy Maiden." Her desperate plea for sanctuary was directed at the figure of divine mercy. Kelia reached Ephraia and desperately clung to her, repeating her plea, "Save me, Holy Maiden." Her cries echoed through the cavern, a desperate call for salvation from Loder's harsh judgment. Ifreya turned her attention fully to Lin Tian, her voice gentle yet inquisitive. "Goblin," she began, then asked directly, "Can you understand my words?" Lin Tian, still contained by the golden light, recognized Ifreya with a surge of hope. She is the holy maiden Ifreya, the spokesperson of the temple they talked about, he realized. He concluded, "If I want to leave here, this might be my only hope." Lin Tian seized the opportunity. "I can," he eagerly responded to Ifreya. He then quickly explained himself. "You are the holy maiden they mentioned, right? I'm actually not a monster of this world. I used to be human." He further pleaded his case. "I became like this because of an accident. I can explain everything if I go with you." Loder, observing Lin Tian's eloquent plea, commented to Ifreya, "It does seem smarter than those goblins, quite rare." Ifreya considered this, musing, Goblins are usually stupid and lowly creatures. They can't speak and think so fluently." A thoughtful expression crossed her face as she pondered. He might be a gift from the Holy Mother. Ifreya turned to Kelia, her expression kind. "Kelia, did this goblin really not hurt you?" she asked. Kelia, relieved to be believed, eagerly confirmed, "Yes, not only did he not hurt me, but he also protected me from other goblins and gave me food." With Kelia's testimony, Ifreya made her decision. "All right, since it's so special, let's take it back first," she declared. "We'll study it thoroughly before making a decision." Kelia smiled, relieved, while Loder stood impassively. Ifreya then turned her gaze to Lin Tian, who was still bathed in the golden light. Her expression softened slightly as she asked him directly, "Are you willing?" Lin Tian, seeing his chance for survival and a new path, readily agreed, his face alight with hope. "I am willing. I'll go with you," he affirmed. Lin Tian's heart swelled with relief. Finally, someone who can listen to reason, he thought. He decided that since staying means death, I might as well go back and prove my innocence. With his decision made, Ifreya waved her hand, and the golden energy encasing Lin Tian dissipated. "Okay, then let's go, Loder," she instructed. Loder, ever stoic, responded, "Understood." Loder turned to Ifreya, a rare hint of deference in his voice. "Thank you for your kindness," he began. "I will repay you properly." His words trailed off, hinting at a future debt to be settled. Ifreya offered Loder a warm, reassuring smile. "Of course," she responded, her voice sweet. But as Loder, with a sudden, chilling shift in demeanor, extended his hand, he plunged his sword deep into Kelia's chest. Kelia gasped in disbelief and pain as blood bloomed around the blade. Lin Tian watched, his eyes wide with horror. Kelia's body collapsed to the ground, a single tear escaping her eye as she met her tragic end. The brutal act was swift, merciless, and utterly unexpected, leaving Lin Tian trembling in the aftermath. Kelia lay dead on the cave floor, a stark testament to the cruelty of the human rescuers. Lin Tian stared at her lifeless form, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. The hope he had found moments ago shattered into 1,000 pieces. Ifreya stood over Kelia's corpse, her beautiful features now twisted into a chilling, sinister smile. Her eyes glowed with an ominous, dark red light, revealing a terrifying, hidden nature. She looked down at the terrified Lin Tian and whispered, her voice laced with a predatory undertone, "When we get back, you better repay me well." The true, manipulative horror of the Holy Maiden was laid bare, leaving Lin Tian trapped and utterly alone. 1 week has passed since the tragedy in the cave. High above the bustling streets of Bright Town, the heavy toll of a cathedral bell resonated through the air, calling the masses to gather. In the center of the town square, Loder stood atop a raised platform, his polished armor gleaming under the morning sun. He addressed the crowd with a practiced, booming authority, calling them the children of God. He proclaimed with a heavy heart that a recent goblin raid had brought immense suffering and harm to their peaceful community. The crowd fell into a hushed, expectant silence as Loder leaned forward, his face twisted into an expression of righteous fury. He claimed that the monsters had used cowardly sneak attacks to slaughter 30 innocent residents of Brighttown. His voice trembled with a manufactured rage, painting a picture of a brutal massacre that fueled the villagers' growing fear. Below the platform, the atmosphere turned toxic with hatred. Men and women raised their fists to the sky, their faces contorted with rage as they cursed the goblin race. They cried out for blood in exchange for blood, demanding an eye for an eye. The crowd's collective voice rose in a feverish chant, declaring that humans and goblins were nothing but mortal enemies, forever divided by blood and bone. Loder gestured dramatically toward a large wooden notice board behind him, where a portrait of a smiling girl, perhaps a fabricated memory of Kelia, was pinned. With a triumphant shout, he declared that the Holy Order, acting on behalf of the temple, had already purged the monsters responsible. He urged the townspeople to find solace in the fact that the fallen villagers had finally been avenged. A hush fell over the crowd as a figure of ethereal beauty stepped forward. Ephraia, the holy maiden, walked with a calculated grace, her white robes fluttering in the breeze. She commanded the people to continue praying with devotion to the temple, her voice sweet and melodic. She promised the gathered masses that the temple would always shield its most faithful followers. The square erupted into cheers of "Long live the knights" and "Long live the temple," the people utterly blinded by the performance. Far from the cheering crowds, within the cold, stone walls of Ephraim's private office, the masks finally slipped. The room was a sanctuary of shadows and ancient scrolls. Ephraim stood over her desk, looking down at a parchment covered in esoteric symbols. She let out a weary sigh of relief, mocking the townspeople by stating that the day's sermon had been a complete success and that the villagers were as foolish and easily led as they had always been. She leaned back in her ornate chair, a cold, predatory light dancing in her eyes. She mused that now the people would pray with even greater fervor and, more importantly, offer even more tributes to the temple. In her hands, she casually swirled a glass vial filled with a mysterious, glowing red liquid. The scene shifted to the dark, damp sublevels of the temple. Lin Tian was no longer the defiant warrior. He was a broken prisoner. A jagged iron muzzle was clamped over his face, drawing blood and silencing his voice. From her seat above him, Ephraim looked down with a gaze of utter indifference. Lin Tian's eyes burned with a concentrated hatred as he glared at her, his muffled voice struggling to form her name. He branded her a traitorous soul in the silence of his mind. Ephraim rose and approached the bound goblin, her face a mask of cruel curiosity. She leaned in close, noting that it was no wonder the temple struggled to eradicate the species when they possessed such resilient vitality. She looked at the red vial in her hand, deciding that this time she would see exactly how her latest poison affected a goblin's biology. Lin Tian's vision blurred with pain and rage. He struggled against his chains, his mind screaming a silent accusation. He thought of how she had deceived him, deceived the world, and most unforgivably, how she and Loder had murdered Kelia in cold blood. He spat a mental curse at her, questioning if this was what she called the Holy Order or human justice. Ephraim's expression shifted to one of mild annoyance. She gripped a wooden stake and shoved it toward Lin Tian's face, mocking him for having the audacity to question human justice. She called him a weak, trashy creature driven only by lust. She then twisted the knife of her words further, claiming that Kelia had been bewitched by him and that her death was her only way to prove her final loyalty to humanity. She loomed over him, her eyes glowing with a terrifying, unnatural light. She sneered that goblins were nothing more than vermin crawling across the continent. She informed him that for a holy maiden to even speak to a creature like him was a favor he could never repay. Ephraim raised her hand, and the air began to crackle with magical energy. She told him that he should be grateful to use his disgusting, small body to contribute to the experiments of the Holy Order. Golden arcs of electricity began to dance between her fingers. With a flick of her wrist, she unleashed a torrent of magical lightning. Lin Tian's body convulsed as the current tore through him, his form silhouetted against a glowing magical circle on the floor. His silent screams were swallowed by the roar of the spell. The world faded to a dull, aching gray. Lin Tian's vision began to fail, the light in his eyes dimming as his consciousness slipped away. He felt the cold touch of the end approaching, his mind filled with a bitter, hollow regret as he wondered if he was truly going to die in such a pathetic state. Memories of the past week flashed before him like shattered glass. He saw the knights standing over the fallen body of Kelia, their boots stained with her blood. He blamed himself for his own foolishness, realizing that his greatest mistake was holding onto human compassion after being reborn as a monster. He had foolishly believed they were righteous and kind. The darkness deepened. He recalled how Loder and Afreya had toyed with him, subjecting him to every imaginable torture while never believing a single word he uttered. His naivety had been his death warrant. His final thoughts were filled with a burning, acidic spite. He reflected on how he hadn't lasted long, toyed to death by a woman he could only describe as a sadistic monster in human skin. The magical circle beneath him flared one last time, consuming his vision in a purple haze. Lin Tian's soul felt as though it were falling through an endless, starry void. As he drifted through the abyss, a singular, dark vow formed in his spirit. He declared that if he ever had the chance to do it all again, he would never trust a human soul. He promised that he would grind their bones to dust and drain every drop of their blood. Suddenly, his eyes snapped open. He found himself floating in a shimmering, celestial expanse, his body glowing with a pale blue light. He gasped, looking at his hands in disbelief, wondering if he was still alive and what this strange, cosmic place could be. A sharp, digital chime echoed through the void as a screen manifested before him. The text announced that the Goblin Life simulation system had finally been activated. The system evaluated his previous attempt at life, bluntly stating that he was dead due to his own foolishness in forgetting his nature as a goblin. It informed him that the pain of his torture was now imprinted on his soul as a permanent lesson. However, it offered him a chance to restart and open a new life, presenting him with two simple choices, yes or no. Lin Tian stared at the screen, his heart racing. He realized that this was his personal system, and it had only activated upon his death. He wondered if this power could truly bring him back to life, even though he knew he would likely be reborn as the lowest of creatures once again. He looked at the glowing interface, asking what the choices truly represented. The system's voice, cold and mechanical, reported that choosing no would result in his soul dissipating into nothingness. However, choosing yes would allow him to retain his current memories and system, sending him back to the Goblin Cave exactly 1 week ago. The weight of the offer hung in the air. Going back a week meant returning to the moment before the knights arrived, back when Kelia was still alive and the betrayal had yet to happen. A slow, terrifying grin spread across Lin Tian's face. The light in the void reflected off his sharpened teeth. He whispered to himself that he understood everything now. His eyes took on a predatory, crimson glow. He declared that this was his chance for revenge. He swore that he would have his vengeance on both Loder and Afreya for everything they had done. Without a moment's hesitation, he reached out and pressed the yes button. A surge of blue energy erupted from the screen, wrapping around his form like a whirlwind. The word revenge burned into his mind as the simulation began to rewrite his destiny. The system chimed once more, announcing that Goblin Life 2.0 was officially beginning. Digital artifacts swirled around him as his consciousness was transferred back across time and space, returning to the damp, familiar air of the Goblin Cave. The transition was complete. Lin Tian stood in the cave, his body surrounded by a fading blue aura. The system informed him that to help him survive a bit longer, it had slightly strengthened his physical form. He looked at his hands, letting out a small, dark chuckle, noting that while the power boost was small, it was better than nothing. A warning message flashed across his vision. It cautioned him that despite being reborn, the danger was far from over. The Holy Order was already approaching the cave. The system sternly noted that if he died again, it would not be able to revive him a second time. Lin Tian narrowed his eyes, acknowledging that he couldn't afford to let his guard down. He looked up, demanding to know what else the system was capable of. The interface explained that the Goblin life simulation system allowed him to foresee future events. It warned that every choice he made would lead to a different outcome. Each simulation required a 24-hour cooldown, but upon completion, he would earn points that could be exchanged for powerful items. Lin Tian realized with a smirk that he could now see the future. He commanded the system to start a life simulation immediately. The scenario was set: escape the Goblin Cave. The system informed him that the cave had already been discovered by Holy Knight Loader, and that escaping would require making a series of critical choices. 3 options appeared before him: warn his fellow goblins and unite to face Loader and his men. Abandon the other goblins and escape alone. Hide in the depths of the cave and pray they don't find him. Each choice was accompanied by a pixelated representation of the potential outcome. Lin Tian studied the choices carefully. He looked back at the shadow of Loader looming in his memory. He reasoned that even if every goblin in the cave united, they couldn't match Loader's strength alone. He concluded that only escaping could truly save his life. He decided to simulate the first option anyway, hoping to earn enough points to buy a weapon for a sneak attack later. The simulation ran, and the screen flashed red with the words, "You dead." The summary stated that he had led the goblins into a desperate battle, but due to the massive gap in strength, he had been slaughtered alongside them. The system advised him to recognize his own strength before making future decisions. Despite the failure, he earned 10 points. The simulation ended, and Lin Tian returned to reality. He confirmed his suspicion that relying on the other goblins was a path to certain death, but he was satisfied with the points he had gained. With a look of intense focus, he commanded the system to open the exchange shop. An array of spectral weapons appeared before him, glowing in various shades of blue and purple. There were jagged scythes, massive spears, and enchanted gauntlets. He marveled at the selection, but realized with a grimace that his points were still far too low for the most powerful gear. His eyes settled on a sleek, crimson-hilted blade. The system identified it as an elven lightweight swift blade, priced at exactly 10 points. It promised a 10% increase in speed and 15 points of strength. Although fragile, the description noted it was incredibly sharp. Lin Tian gripped the new weapon, feeling the sudden surge of power. He realized that with such a sharp blade, he could achieve a one-hit kill if he struck a vital spot. He suddenly paused, a look of confusion crossing his face. He asked the system why he hadn't seen Kelia yet and where she had gone in this new timeline. The system explained that due to his rebirth, some details of the timeline had shifted. In this version of reality, Kelia was never captured by the goblins in the first place and was currently living happily back in the village. A vision of her smiling while carrying groceries appeared on the screen. Lin Tian stood in the silence of the cave for a long moment, processing the information. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. He looked down, his gaze softening. He whispered to himself that it seemed he had fulfilled his promise to Kelia after all. With her safety assured, he declared that he no longer had any concerns holding him back. He turned and broke into a sprint, his tattered cloak billowing behind him. He knew he had to escape and survive. He headed toward the narrowest passage in the cave, reasoning that because the entrance was smaller, the guard station there would likely be weaker. Outside the narrow entrance, 2 human knights stood watch. One complained to the other, stating that the goblins were truly disgusting creatures. The other knight told him to hang in there, remarking that this task was already quite easy compared to their usual duties. Lin Tian stopped just inside the shadows of the tunnel, his ears twitching as he caught the sound of their voices. The knights continued their conversation, unaware of the predator watching them. One boasted that the entrance was so small that any goblin foolish enough to run out would be trash he could crush with a single hammer strike. However, the other knight reminded him of Lord Loder's orders. Any girl attempting to escape the chaos of a raid must be killed immediately to ensure no witnesses reach the village. The first knight told him to stop nagging, acknowledging the order. Lin Tian's blood ran cold. He gripped the hilt of his elven blade, his knuckles turning white. He cursed the holy order, realizing they were willing to kill their own kind just to maintain their rule. He knew that if they treated humans this way, they would show a goblin like him no mercy at all. He realized he had no choice but to fight his way out. He ducked back into the darkness and covered his mouth, concentrating. Using his past human knowledge, he faked a high-pitched, desperate voice to sound like a terrified girl. He cried out for help, claiming to be a girl from Bright Town captured by goblins. Outside, the knights perked up, one of them remarking that their target had finally arrived. He whispered to his comrade that if they killed this straggler, Lord Loder would reward them handsomely. One of the knights approached the cave opening, a fake, welcoming smile on his face. He called out for the girl to come out and not be afraid, claiming he was there as a protector to take her back home. Behind his back, his hand gripped the hilt of his sword, ready to strike the moment she appeared. In a flash of motion, Lin Tian lunged from the shadows, not as a victim, but as an executioner. Before the knight could even draw his weapon, Lin Tian's elven blade found its mark, spraying a fountain of blood across the cave wall. He mocked the dying man's words, whispering that he was the one who would be taking the knight back to the earth. With a feral glint in his eyes, he dared the humans to bring everything they had. The narrow, sun-drenched exit of the cavern was supposed to be a place of rescue, but instead, it became a stage for a lethal deception. One of the Holy Order knights, oblivious to the predator lurking just a step away, grew impatient. He turned his back to the cave, calling out to his companion with an annoyed tone, questioning what was taking so long and demanding that he hurry up. He had no idea that the companion he was addressing was already gone, replaced by a ghost seeking vengeance. Beneath the tattered hood of his stolen cloak, Lin Tian's face twisted into a sharp, predatory grin. The time for faking a damsel's voice was over. With a sudden burst of speed, he lunged forward. The unsuspecting knight barely had time to register the blur of movement before a cold blade caught the light. The man's eyes widened in sheer disbelief, stammering a confused question about what was happening as the world began to tilt. The struggle was short and brutal. Lin Tian slammed into the man, the force of his momentum pinning the knight against the rough stone. The knight's breath hitched in terror as he finally saw the face beneath the hood. His voice cracked as he realized the truth, gasping out a single, horrified word. A monster he thought was nothing more than mindless prey. Lin Tian, his eyes glowing with an ominous red light, leaped into the air, his elven blade descending like a bolt of dark lightning. A ragged scream tore through the forest as the sharp edge of the dagger carved through the knight's chest. The man let out a pained cry, the sound of tearing fabric and flesh echoing against the trees. He staggered back, clutching at a wound that bloomed crimson against his gray tunic, his face a mask of pure agony and shock. The knight collapsed to the grass, his strength failing as he looked up at the creature standing over him. His voice was a panicked wheeze, expressing absolute disbelief that a creature like this could actually speak the human tongue. Lin Tian didn't answer with words. He simply held the blood-slicked blade to the man's throat, watching the light of hope fade from his eyes. Desperation took hold of the dying man. He scrambled backward on the dirt, his hands trembling as he begged for his life. He pleaded for mercy, his voice high and thin, asking the monster to spare him and just let him go. In a last-ditch effort to find a spark of humanity in his executioner, the knight fumbled for a pocket watch. He held it out with shaking hands, showing a small, painted portrait of a woman and a young child inside. He sobbed that he had a family and a daughter, claiming that they were all waiting at home for his return. It was a pathetic display of the same compassion Lin Tian had once offered, a compassion that had been rewarded with fire and steel. Seeing that Lin Tian possessed intelligence, the knight tried to negotiate. He groveled, insisting that since the goblin was so smart, he had to understand his position. He claimed he was merely a pawn following the cruel orders of the Holy Order, asserting that he had been forced to come to this place against his will. When pity failed, the knight turned to bribery. He offered bags of gold coins and, in a display of the true wrought within his soul, promised to bring a fresh and juicy human girl to the goblin if he were allowed to live. He spoke of the benefits of their cooperation, his eyes darting around for any sign that the monster was swaying. Lin Tian remained a silent, looming shadow, his eyes cold and unreadable. The knight's pleading was a front. Detecting what he thought was a moment of distraction, his face twisted into a mask of manic malice. He thought he saw an opening and lunged forward with a hidden dagger, his voice a venomous snarl as he cursed the stupid beast and demanded that it die. He was too slow. In a single, fluid motion, Lin Tian's blade whistled through the air. A spray of hot blood painted the sky as the knight's head was severed from his shoulders, his final expression of hatred frozen forever. The man's body slumped into the tall grass, silent at last. Lin Tian stood amidst the carnage, a faint sense of detachment settling over him. The silence of the forest returned, broken only by the rustle of leaves. On the blood-stained ground lay the discarded pocket watch, its glass cracked, the image of the family now meaningless. Lin Tian looked down at his bloodied weapon, his expression hollow and grim. The human part of him was fading, replaced by the cold necessity of survival. A shimmering blue light suddenly enveloped the scene, the system acknowledging his victory. The bodies of the two knights lay still on the forest floor as the world around Lin Tian seemed to pulse with digital artifacts. Lin Tian's ears twitched. High-strung and alert, he caught the faint, unmistakable echo of a familiar voice. His eyes narrowed with a sharp intensity. It was Loder. The hunters had become the hunted, and they were closing in on his location. He turned away from the bodies, his cloak swirling around him like a shroud. He whispered a chilling promise to the wind, stating that they would meet again very soon. His gaze lingered on the path back to the cave as he spoke the names of his tormentors, Loder and Ephraia, with a voice like grinding stones. Moments later, the sun began to set, casting long, skeletal shadows through the trees. Loder and Ephraia arrived at the site of the ambush. They found the stripped, lifeless bodies of their men discarded like trash in the clearing. Loder knelt by one of the corpses, his brow furrowed in a mix of confusion and mounting rage. He demanded to know what was happening, wondering aloud if a group of goblins had somehow managed to slip through their blockade unnoticed. Ephraia stood over him, her elegant features illuminated by the dying light. She mused that a goblin capable of killing 2 trained soldiers had to be a mutant. Loder agreed, his voice low and dangerous. He noted that if such a creature had escaped, it was an omen of dark things to come. Frustration boiled over as Loder kicked the body of his subordinate. He spat a curse at the dead man, calling him useless for being unable to handle a single mutant creature. His arrogance was eclipsed only by his irritation at the setback. In contrast to Loder's anger, a dark, twisted delight spread across Ephraia's face. She licked her lips, her eyes glowing with a predatory, violet light. She remarked that a mutant goblin sounded like it would be a fun toy to play with. She vowed that once they caught it, she would find 1,000 new ways to make it suffer for her amusement. Deep in the heart of the moonlit forest, Lin Tian leaned against a massive tree, his chest heaving as he finally allowed himself to breathe. The pale moonlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating his exhausted features. He let out a ragged sigh of relief, realizing that for the first time in 2 lives, he had finally managed to survive the night. Hunger gnawed at him, and he bit into a stolen apple with feral intensity. As he ate, he reflected on the hatred humans held for his kind. He decided that since they despised goblins so much, he would repay them by embracing the very traits they feared. He thought about the goblin path to power, upgrading through consumption and legacy. He resolved to breed a stronger generation and expand his influence until the world trembled. The shadows of his enemies seemed to loom in his mind. With a hand covering half his face and his eyes burning with a new, dark purpose, he made a vow. In this life, he would ensure that every man's only wish would be for the mercy of death, and he would force the world to bow before him. As he moved through the dense undergrowth, a sharp rustling sound stopped him in his tracks. He ducked into the shadows, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his blade. He wondered if Loader's group was already on his trail again, his nerves pulled taut. He lunged into a thicket of bushes, shouting a demand to know who was there. His instincts told him to strike first to maintain the upper hand, his blade leading the way into the darkness. A small figure tripped over a protruding root and tumbled into the moonlight with a startled cry. Lin Tian froze, his blade inches from the stranger's throat. He blinked in confusion, realizing he was looking at another goblin. His shock grew as the creature spoke a clear, coherent word. Lin Tian stared at the small figure, his mind racing to process what he was seeing. The figure was a female goblin, her lavender hair disheveled and her eyes filled with tears. She clutched her bruised leg, crying out that it hurt. Lin Tian was utterly baffled. According to everything he knew, goblins were a single-gendered race that relied on other species to survive. Seeing a female of his own kind shattered his understanding of the world. The girl, named you, trembled as she looked up at the hooded warrior. She begged him not to hurt her, stammering that she was only there to fetch water for her people. Lin Tian remained silent, his mind reeling. He struggled to understand how a lowly goblin like this was capable of speaking in full, complex sentences. A new system screen flickered into existence, scanning the girl. It identified her as Little Goblin, you, a level 3 messenger of God. Most importantly, it revealed a hidden legend. If a male goblin were to mate with a female of his own race, he would set foot on the path to becoming the legendary Goblin God. The revelation hit Lin Tian like a physical blow. He realized that this fragile girl was the key to his ascension. He looked at her with a new, calculating gaze, realizing that the future he desired was now within his grasp. You continued to sob, explaining that she had been sent by her chief to get water and feared being beaten to death if she returned empty-handed. Seeing her genuine distress, Lin Tian's edges softened. He offered a clumsy apology, admitting he hadn't meant to frighten her. He reached out, placing a bandaged hand gently on her shoulder. He told her there, and urged her to stop crying, his voice uncharacteristically soft. He warned her that if she continued to wail, she would only draw the attention of Loader and his hunters. The mention of danger made the girl go silent instantly. You looked up at him, her large eyes wide with wonder. She asked with a soft voice if he could actually talk as well. Lin Tian gave a short, firm nod, confirming that he could. He realized that regular goblins were likely too primitive for speech, and she simply hadn't interacted with anyone else. You looked at him with newfound admiration, remarking on how kind he was. She lamented that other goblins only ever hit or scolded her. She told him that since he seemed to have nowhere to go, he should come back to her tribe with her. The offer sparked a surge of excitement in Lin Tian. He asked if there truly was a tribe nearby. However, he quickly tempered his enthusiasm, reminding himself that Loader was still out there. He reasoned that now was not the time for legacy. The priority was finding a sanctuary where they couldn't be found. You blushed, her expression shy and grateful. She promised to take him there, her gaze fixed on the ground as she led the way. A dark, red light returned to Lin Tian's eyes. He had been worried about how to build an army, and now a ready-made force was being presented to him. He commanded her to take him to her tribe immediately. They reached the edge of a hidden valley where dozens of tents were clustered around flickering campfires. It was a proper settlement, far larger and more organized than the cave he had escaped from. As Lin Tian entered the camp, a chorus of mocking laughter greeted him. The local goblins pointed and jeered, asking why he was wearing human clothes and calling him a weird creature. They mock you for bringing such a freak into their home. Lin Tian ignored their taunts, noting with a cold calculation that there were many able-bodied warriors in this group. He stood tall in the center of the camp, declaring that this would be his new beginning. He addressed the mocking crowd with a voice that commanded attention, stating that he was there to join them and demanding to see their leader. The warriors surrounding him sneered, laughing at the idea of an outsider demanding an audience with their boss. They claimed the leader wasn't someone he could just see on a whim. They decided to catch him first and drag him before their chief as a prisoner. You jumped in front of him, her voice desperate as she tried to defend him, telling the others that he wasn't a bad guy and pleading with them not to act rashly. Suddenly, a deep, guttural voice boomed from the largest tent, demanding to know why everyone was making such a ruckus. A massive, hulking goblin emerged, draped in primitive ornaments and clutching a staff topped with human skulls. The crowd erupted into cheers for their boss. Lin Tian's system immediately scanned the newcomer, a level 25 priest with titles like Breeding Machine and Sly Old Fox. He was a formidable opponent, wielding a skull staff and bone necklaces that pulsed with dark energy. The boss glared at the crowd, asking who was responsible for the noise. Lin Tian stared back, his gaze unwavering. He noted that he hadn't expected to find a goblin with such a high level so soon, but he knew that to lead this tribe, he would first have to conquer the monster standing in his way. In the heart of the goblin encampment, a tense silence fell as the tribal hierarchy was challenged. The massive goblin priest, his staff adorned with the bleached skulls of fallen enemies, peered down at the lavender-haired girl. He demanded to know what she was doing with the outsider she had brought into their midst. You trembled under his gaze, her voice small as she explained that the stranger had nowhere else to go. The priest's face contorted into a grotesque, jagged grin. His red eyes flared with a cruel hunger as he let out a guttural bark of approval. However, his mercy was short-lived. He commanded the tribe to slaughter the freakish outsider and prepare his flesh for a feast. The surrounding goblins erupted into a manic frenzy, cackling with glee at the prospect of fresh meat. Before the mob could descend, Lin Tian moved with a grace that defied his monstrous form. He unsheathed his elven blade, the steel catching the moonlight with a lethal shimmer. He called for a halt, his voice steady and commanding. He declared that he possessed the knowledge to forge weapons and promised that if they allowed him to join, he would make the entire tribe stronger than they ever imagined. The priest signaled for his warriors to wait. He moved closer, his heavy footsteps thudding against the dirt as he studied the hooded figure. Lin Tian stood his ground, the tip of his dagger pointed toward the earth, exuding a confidence that made the larger monster hesitate. The tribal leader leaned in close, his nostrils flaring as he caught the outsider's scent. He noted that the stranger didn't smell like a liar. His curiosity piqued. He demanded to know exactly what kind of armaments this freak was capable of producing. Lin Tian met the priest's gaze without blinking. He explained that as long as they could secure iron ore, he could craft tools and weapons of true metal. He glanced at his own blade, adding that with enough time, he could produce equipment far superior even to the one he currently held. Internally, Lin Tian noted that the higher a goblin's level, the more fluent and intelligent they became. He leaned into the priest's ambition, arguing that with iron tools, the tribe would no longer have to hide. They would be capable of crushing any monster or human that dared to cross their path. The promise of power spread through the camp like wildfire. The common goblins cheered, boasting that with iron in their hands, they would no longer fear the humans. Their desires turned predatory as they shouted about heading north to hunt for elves, their simple minds already intoxicated by the promise of conquest. The priest's expression hardened into a mask of cold calculation. He agreed to the terms but set a brutal deadline. He gave Lin Tian exactly 3 days to find the ore and produce the promised tools. He warned that if the outsider failed, he would personally execute both Lin Tian and you. With a final, mocking laugh, the priest turned and led his warriors back toward the main camp. Lin Tian watched them go. His eyes narrowed as he realized the precariousness of his new position. As the shadows of the tribe faded, Lin Tian reflected on the priest's ruthlessness. He recognized a madman who wouldn't hesitate to kill his own kin to maintain control. He knew he couldn't win a direct confrontation yet. He had to use the iron tools as a gamble to buy the time he needed to grow stronger. Night deepened over the forest. A pale, cold moon hung in the sky, silhouetting a flock of scavengers that took flight over the canopy. A single blue spark of energy flickered in the dark, a silent reminder of the system guiding Lin Tian's hand. The journey for resources was grueling. You struggled to keep pace, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She leaned heavily on a wooden staff, admitting through her exhaustion that they had been walking all day and her strength was failing. The other goblins in the scouting party showed no mercy. One of them lashed out, kicking you to the ground with a sneer. They mocked her as an ugly thing, threatening to beat her to death if she didn't find the ore they sought. You cried out in pain, pleading for them to stop. The abuse continued as the goblins circled her, laughing at her weakness. They branded her lazy and claimed she was practically asking for death. They urged each other to strike harder, their cruelty unchecked in the isolation of the woods. A stone whistled through the air, striking one of the aggressors squarely in the head. Lin Tian stepped out of the shadows, his presence looming and dangerous. He reminded the group with a chilling finality that he had brought them there to find iron ore, not to indulge in petty infighting. He stood over the cowering goblins, his face hidden in shadow. He reiterated his instructions on what the ore looked like and issued a grim ultimatum. Find at least one piece in the valley ahead, or face the consequences. His eyes flashed with a terrifying, absolute malice. He didn't need to raise his voice to convey the threat. The edge of his blade said enough. He promised them that if they failed him, they would all die where they stood. Terrified by the outsider's aura, the goblins scrambled away into the underbrush. They muttered curses as they fled, consoling themselves with the thought that once the ore was found, the priest would surely dispose of Lin Tian for them. Lin Tian stood alone in the quiet of the valley, his expression weary. He knew the goblins were right. Even if he succeeded in making the tools, his life was on a countdown. The priest would never allow a rival intelligence to survive for long. The system's blue interface flickered before his eyes, repeating the ancient legend. It reminded him that the path to becoming a Goblin God lay in a union with a female of his own kind. He looked at you, realizing that the key to his survival and his revenge was sitting right in front of him. You sat on the ground, her head in her hands as she wept quietly. The weight of the tribe's cruelty and the fear of the priest seemed to have finally broken her spirit. Lin Tian knelt beside her, his movements surprisingly gentle. He reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek, telling her not to cry anymore. He promised that if she stayed by his side, he would protect her for the rest of her life. He offered her food, warmth, and a sanctuary where no one would ever dare to bully her again. You looked at him with wide, hopeful eyes, barely able to believe his words. Lin Tian maintained a firm, honest gaze. He admitted they were both weak now, but he confessed that to avoid being victims, he needed her help to unlock his true potential. The girl's fear was replaced by a dawning determination. She asked him earnestly how she could help him become stronger. Lin Tian leaned in, his voice a low murmur. He explained the unique biology of their race, that if she were willing to start a legacy with him, his strength would grow alongside their family. Yu's face flushed a deep crimson, her fingers twitching nervously. She admitted that she had never tried such a thing before, her heart racing at the sudden intimacy of the request. Lin Tian offered a reassuring, knowing smile. He told her it was all right as long as she was willing to trust him. He leaned forward, and in the quiet of the moonlit valley, they shared a kiss that sealed their pact. Driven by a desire to see him strong enough to survive the coming storm, you pulled him closer. She whispered her consent, begging him to let her be the mother of his children so that he could become the protector she desperately needed. As they embraced, the system chimed with a triumphant notification. It announced that the union would result in 7 offspring, a feat that immediately shattered Lin Tian's previous limitations and increased his level cap. A surge of raw, primal energy flooded Lin Tian's nervous system. The interface displayed a massive boost to his statistics. His attack power rose, his health pool expanded by 100 points, and his defenses hardened. Lin Tian's body began to physically evolve. His muscles became more defined, and a faint, electrical aura danced across his skin. He reached level 7, his overall power more than doubling. He flexed his bandaged hands, noting with a dark satisfaction that his chances of defeating the priest had just improved drastically. He gathered you into his arms, wrapping his tattered cloak around her to shield her from the night chill. He declared once more that she belonged to him now and vowed to protect her with his very life. You leaned into his chest, whispering that he was truly the kindest soul she had ever known. The moment of peace was interrupted by a commotion nearby. Lin Tian's eyes snapped toward the sound. He noted that while the scouting party had actually managed to find the iron ore, they had also managed to lead a new danger back to them. He stood up, his hand dropping to the hilt of his dagger. He told you to wait there and stay hidden. You gripped her staff, her eyes wide with worry as she warned him that a pack of wolves was closing in. Desperate screams echoed through the trees as the common goblins fled for their lives. Behind them, a massive demon wolf lunged from the shadows, its fur matted and its eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. The goblins cried out for help, their earlier bravado completely vanished. The beast was a blur of silver-blue fur and bared fangs. It lunged at one of the goblins carrying a heavy sack of ore, its jaws snapping shut inches from the terrified creature's throat. Lin Tian didn't hesitate. He leaped into the fray, his movements now bolstered by his recent evolution. He drove his elven blade deep into the wolf's shoulder, the impact sending a spray of dark blood across the clearing. The goblin he saved stared up in shock, clutching the ore to his chest. With a final decisive strike, the demon wolf collapsed, its massive form hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Lin Tian stood over the carcass, his breath steady and his blade dripping. The threat had been neutralized in seconds. He turned toward the surviving goblin, his eyes glowing with an intense, authoritative light. He complimented the creature on the find, but commanded him to hand over the iron ore immediately. The goblin hoisted a large, jagged chunk of raw ore above his head, sweating under the weight. Lin Tian inspected the quality, a sharp, satisfied grin spreading across his face. He told the survivors that the quality was excellent and ordered them to gather more, promising that once they returned to the safety of the camp, he would forge them weapons that would make them legends. The goblins bowed their heads in subservience, shouting their agreement as they recognized their new master. In the clarity of the morning light, Lin Tian finally completed his task. He stood back, satisfied, as the local goblins crowded around to witness his handiwork. A wave of murmurs rippled through the group. They marveled that the outsider had actually managed to forge something, yet a few remained skeptical, wondering if the strange-looking objects were truly functional. Evidence of the weapon's lethality lay sprawled before them in the clearing. Lin Tian stood over the carcass of a massive magic wolf he had recently slain, urging the tribe to observe the results closely. He proudly proclaimed that this was the power of a weapon crafted from true iron ore. Nearby, the goblin priest watched with a calculating intensity, his red eyes fixed on the glint of the metal. One of the scouts who had witnessed the hunt stepped forward to confirm the story, insisting that Lin Tian had used the blade to slaughter the beast and save them all. The atmosphere in the camp shifted instantly. The goblins realized that these iron spears were vastly superior to their primitive stone tools, their voices rising in a chorus of amazement. Lin Tian hoisted a finished spear high, his bandaged grip firm on the wood. He addressed the gathered horde, asking if they wanted to wield such power themselves. The camp erupted into a frenzied cheer as the goblins shouted their eager approval. The goblin priest remained silent, his gaze darting between the fallen wolf and the hooded stranger. He leaned in, his expression unreadable behind his bone mask, clearly weighing the potential of this new arrival against the threat he posed to the current order. The massive leader slammed the butt of his staff into the ground to command silence. He looked directly at Lin Tian and acknowledged that the outsider had not been lying about his abilities. He conceded that the man truly possessed the skill to forge iron tools for the tribe. However, the priest's favor came with a ruthless condition. He informed Lin Tian that if he intended to stay, he would have to prove his worth on a larger scale. He demanded that 50 of these iron weapons be completed within a mere 2 days. The impossible deadline caused a stir among the common goblins. Some muttered that their boss was becoming as cruel and demanding as the humans they despised. Despite the pressure, several members of the tribe stepped forward, offering to assist Brother Lin with the labor to ensure the weapons were finished on time. The sun set on the final day of the challenge. Lin Tian stood in the moonlight, a sharp, confident smile touching his lips. Behind him, a large bundle of finished spears lay ready, their iron heads reflecting the pale light of the stars. The tribe gathered for the delivery, their earlier skepticism replaced by a budding respect. They hailed Lin Tian with enthusiasm as he stepped toward the center of the camp. He informed them that he had brought exactly what the leader had asked for. The goblin priest loomed over the iron-tipped spears, his red eyes glowing with a dark satisfaction. He looked at Lin Tian and admitted that he had done a very good job in fulfilling the contract. With the task complete, the leader declared a night of celebration. He commanded the tribe to feast on meat and announced that they would officially honor Lin Tian for joining their ranks. The camp was filled with rhythmic chanting and the sounds of celebratory preparation. A massive bonfire roared in the center of the camp, casting long, dancing shadows against the trees. A whole beast was roasted over the flames, the fat dripping and sizzling into the embers. You approached Lin Tian as the festivities reached their peak, her face glowing with a shy warmth. She presented him with a choice portion of the meat, explaining that it was a special gift the priest had specifically set aside for him as a sign of respect. Lin Tian took a bite, but his satisfaction was short-lived. A sudden, searing agony gripped his chest. His eyes went wide and bloodshot as he began to choke, his vision swimming in a haze of red. You cried out in terror, asking what was happening to him as he collapsed forward, unable to draw breath. Lin Tian lay slumped against you, his strength rapidly fading. From the shadows, the goblin priest stepped forward, his heavy footsteps thudding with an ominous weight. He looked down at the dying outsider with a gaze devoid of any warmth. The leader let out a booming, mocking laugh that echoed through the forest. He called Lin Tian a fool for thinking he was clever enough to challenge his rule. He revealed that he had recognized Lin Tian's hidden ambitions from the start, and that there was only one way to deal with a rival intelligence. The giant reached down and seized you by the hair, yanking her toward him. He sneered at the paralyzed Lin Tian, noting how much he seemed to care for the girl. He declared that Lin Tian would have to watch as he used the outsider's own knife to execute the traitor who brought him here. The priest pressed the sharp edge of the elven blade against Yu's throat. She wept silently, her eyes fixed on Lin Tian. The leader taunted him one last time, wanting to see if he could maintain his smug composure as his only ally was slaughtered before his eyes. The air was suddenly filled with a violent spray of crimson. In a blur of motion that defied the effects of any poison, Lin Tian lunged from the ground. His own blade whistled through the night, and with a clean, brutal strike, he severed the priest's hand at the wrist. The leader's severed limb thudded into the dirt, still clutching the knife. The priest staggered back, staring at his bloody stump in total disbelief. Lin Tian stood tall, his eyes glowing with a lethal, purple light. He laughed at the old monster, calling him the truly stupid one. He revealed that he had known about the poison from the very beginning thanks to his system, and had merely been playing along to catch the priest off guard. Driven by pure, agonizing rage, the priest roared a curse, demanding that Lin Tian die. He swung his massive skull staff with every ounce of his remaining strength, aiming to crush the outsider into the earth. Lin Tian moved with supernatural agility. He ducked beneath the heavy staff, the weapon passing harmlessly through the space where his head had been a second before. The surrounding tribe watched in stunned silence as their once mighty leader missed his mark. Before the giant could recover, Lin Tian leaped onto his broad shoulders. He raised his blade high, his face a mask of cold, unyielding focus. He was no longer a servant or a guest. He was the executioner. A brilliant flash of blue energy followed the downward arc of his arm. With a single, powerful stroke, Lin Tian decapitated the goblin priest. The leader's head was sent flying into the darkness, silhouetted against the indifferent face of the moon. The giant's headless body slumped into the dirt with a heavy thud, ending his reign forever. Lin Tian stood over the remains, his back to the tribe, as the silence of the forest returned. The onlookers stared at him with a mixture of terror and awe. Lin Tian turned to face the camp, his voice resonant and commanding. He declared to the gathered horde that from that moment on, he was their new boss. He paced through the clearing, his blade still dripping with the priest's blood. He promised to lead them to greatness, vowing that they would soon march to attack the elves and the humans who had long considered them vermin. He pulled you close to him, his voice rising in a triumphant roar. He promised his followers a future of primal dominance and endless feasts, painting a picture of a world where they were the masters and everyone else was prey. The tribe, invigorated by his display of raw power and the promise of conquest, erupted into a rhythmic chant. They raised their new iron spears to the sky, howling their allegiance to their new leader. Lin Tian looked down at the cooling corpse of the former leader. He gestured toward the body, his eyes cold and clinical. He informed the ravenous goblins that the body of their former master was now theirs to do with as they pleased. Without hesitation, the horde descended upon the remains, their primal instincts taking over as they consumed the source of their previous fear. As the gruesome sounds of the feast echoed behind him, Lin Tian's gaze turned toward the distant trees. He reflected that taking over the tribe was only the beginning of his revenge. He planned to eventually force the elves into his service, ensuring that the next generation of his kind would be the strongest the continent had ever seen. In the shadows of the high canopy, a hidden figure watched the entire scene unfold with growing horror. Cassandra, the elven scout, crouched among the leaves, her face pale. She breathed a quiet, terrified question, wondering exactly what kind of monster had just been born in the heart of the forest. High above the forest floor, the elven settlement stood as a masterpiece of nature and architecture. Ornate tree houses, glowing with an ethereal light, were perched precariously on massive branches and supported by sturdy wooden pillars. A full, brilliant moon hung in the dark sky, casting a silver glow over the tranquil cascading waterfalls and the bridges that connected the majestic structures. The peace of the sanctuary was shattered as an elven scout raced across the high bridges. Other elves watched in surprise, noting the princess's sudden return. One of the attendants tried to stop her, reminding her that the clan mother was occupied, but Cassandra didn't slow down. Her voice was sharp with desperation as she shouted that she had news too urgent to wait. Cassandra burst through the heavy doors of the inner sanctum, her breathing heavy and her face etched with worry. She ignored all protocol, crying out to her mother that she had immediate news to report. Inside the opulent, candlelit chamber, the atmosphere was one of hedonistic luxury. Leah, the elven matriarch, reclined on a plush divan, surrounded by several male elves who attended to her every whim. One fed her grapes while others lingered close to her. Leah looked up, her expression a mix of amusement and annoyance as she recognized the intruder. Kasana's face turned a deep, embarrassed scarlet at the sight. She stammered an apology, her earlier resolve faltering as she told her mother she would leave at once. Leah raised a hand, her voice calm and authoritative, telling the girl to wait. She reasoned that if Cassena had rushed in with such disregard for etiquette, the matter must indeed be of great importance. Still blushing but regaining her focus, Cassena stepped forward. She reported that she had discovered vital information regarding the Goblin tribe currently residing in the forest. The matriarch's reaction was one of pure, haughty disdain. She scoffed at the mention of the monsters, labeling them as nothing more than weak, filthy, low-level vermin. She questioned what could possibly be significant enough about such creatures to warrant an interruption. Kasana's expression grew grim as she detailed her findings. She explained that just that morning, she had discovered the remains of a black-haired giant bear in the enchanted forest, gnawed completely to the bone. She noted that the area was covered in goblin footprints and signs of a coordinated hunt. Her voice trembled slightly as she reminded Leah that the giant bear was one of the forest's fiercest predators, a beast no ordinary goblin should ever be capable of felling. She added that she had personally witnessed the old goblin chief being killed by a younger, far more capable individual just a few days prior, suggesting a dangerous change in leadership. The news finally pierced Leah's indifference. Her eyes narrowed as she repeated the words, contemplating the implications of a new chief rising among the monsters. Leah shifted on her divan, a predatory glint appearing in her eyes. She observed that the goblin population in the forest seemed to have recovered more quickly than anticipated. She then issued a cold, clinical command to Cassena, telling her to take a squad and clean up the tribe. However, she emphasized that they shouldn't kill them all at once, insisting that some be kept alive. The matriarch's true cruelty was revealed as she explained her reasoning. She noted that potions brewed from freshly extracted goblin hearts served as an excellent tonic for the male elves of their tribe. Cassena looked on with a mixture of shock and submission, whispering her understanding of her mother's dark desires. Leah's gaze softened into a manipulative warmth. She called Cassena her dear princess and acknowledged how hard she had worked over the past few days. As a reward, she offered to send a male elf to her chambers that night, suggesting that more could be provided if one was not enough. Kasana's face exploded into a fresh wave of heat. She panicked, stammering that she would return to the forest immediately to investigate further and report back at once. Back at the goblin encampment, the atmosphere was one of strategic preparation. Several goblins stood around a crackling fire, laying out a series of sticks on the dirt. They explained to their new leader that each stick represented one elven treehouse. They estimated that there were roughly 30 such homes in the enchanted forest, all of them built high into the canopy. Lin Tian knelt by the map, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. He praised his scouts for their good work. He made a bold, incentivizing promise, declaring that once they conquered the elf tribe, he would reward the scouts with 2 elves of their own. He then commanded the tribe to begin sharpening their iron weapons for the coming slaughter. The goblins erupted into a chorus of manic laughter, the promise of such high-quality rewards fueling their loyalty. One of them boasted that he would get the rest of the brothers ready with their new armaments immediately. Lin Tian sat in the center of the camp, a dark, calculating presence amidst his growing army. He looked down at the stick map, performing a cold mental calculation. He reasoned that with 30 tree houses and at least 2 elves per home, they were facing 60 enemies. Factoring in the guards at the mines, he estimated their total opposition to be at least 70 strong. Since the death of the previous priest, Lin Tian had transformed the tribe. He reflected on how he had led them to mine, forge superior weapons, and hunt increasingly dangerous monsters to raise their collective power. Standing atop a rock, he addressed his warriors, announcing that their official campaign in the enchanted forest would begin that very day. His followers shouted their readiness in a unified roar. The montage of their growth was brutal and efficient. Lin Tian stood over the massive carcass of a tusked beast, his system announcing that he had acquired a new skill, Giant Fang Attack. He was no longer just surviving. He was evolving. The tribe followed his lead, swarming over large, rock-like entities. As they feasted on the remains of these magical creatures, the system notified Lin Tian that he had gained a stone skin skill, significantly boosting his defensive capabilities. The training continued as Lin Tian engaged in high-speed combat with agile, monkey-like monsters. He moved with a grace and speed that surpassed his previous life. The system chimed again, granting him the skills of stealth and the ability to climb with superhuman ease. Even massive serpents were not safe from the horde. The goblins swarmed over a gargantuan snake, their numbers and new weapons overwhelming the beast. From this kill, Lin Tian acquired the ability of venom secretion. He noted that through their collective devour skill, the entire tribe had gained numerous abilities and their overall levels had surged. Lin Tian's evolution was striking. His form was now lean and powerful, his eyes glowing with an intense, violet light. His statistics screen showed he had reached level 18 with a total combat power of 250. He compared his current strength to his knowledge of the elves, noting that an average elven warrior possessed a combat power of roughly 200. A confident smirk crossed his face. He realized that, through his leadership and the system's guidance, the overall strength of his tribe had finally surpassed that of the elves they were about to raid. A digital notification appeared in his vision, announcing that the simulation system's cooldown was complete. Lin Tian realized that while they were powerful, they were entering elven territory and needed to be cautious. He commanded the system to start a new simulation to test their odds. The simulation flickered into life, depicting the night before the raid. The scenario showed Lin Tian leading a strengthened goblin army toward the elven settlement, his digital avatar radiating confidence. However, the simulation took a dark turn. It depicted the elves launching a masterful ambush, drawing the goblin army into a lethal trap and raining down arrows from the high branches. The simulated outcome was catastrophic. It showed Lin Tian and his scouts being captured by the elven matriarch and subsequently hanged from the trees of the enchanted forest as a gruesome warning to the rest of the goblin race. The screen flashed red, displaying a score of 0 and no rewards. The summary was blunt, stating that while he thought his plan was foolproof, he had actually been under someone else's control the entire time. Lin Tian stared at the result, his expression darkening as he processed the cryptic warning. He looked up from the screen, his gaze sweeping over the surrounding woods. He concluded there was only one possible explanation for such a total failure. The tribe was already being watched by elven spies. He focused his heightened goblin senses, knowing that his race possessed incredibly keen hearing and smell. He told himself that if he concentrated, he would be able to find the clues he needed to identify the voyeurs in the shadows. His eyes suddenly locked onto a specific patch of dense foliage. A purple aura of intensity flared around him as he realized he had found his mark. Hidden among the trees, Cassena and her companion realized they had been spotted. She whispered urgently that the goblins were planning a raid and noted the terrifying change in their behavior over the last few days. She told her partner they had to hurry back and warn the mother before it was too late. As the elves attempted to flee through the canopy, a projectile whistled through the night air. Cassena let out a sharp cry of pain as a poisoned bolt or arrow struck her from behind, the impact nearly knocking her from her perch. The elven scout tumbled to the forest floor, her strength deserting her instantly. She gasped, realizing that she couldn't move a single muscle. Nearby, the goblins cheered, praising their boss for a shot that was perfectly dead on. Cassena lay paralyzed on the grass, her breathing shallow. She looked down at her numbing limbs, wondering with a mounting horror if the weapon that struck her had been coated in a powerful venom. Lin Tian stepped out from the darkness, his face illuminated by the moonlight. He let out a small, dark chuckle, noting that he hadn't expected to catch the elven princess so easily. He told her with a menacing grin that she had shown up at exactly the right time. He stood over the fallen scouts, his silhouette tall and imposing. He ignored Kasana's glare and issued a simple, cold command to his followers: take them all back to the camp. The goblins shouted their compliance, eager to begin their revenge. In the dim, unsettling atmosphere of the goblin camp, the silence was broken by the harsh splash of cold water. A group of goblins stood over their captive, demanding that she wake up. Kasana, the elven princess, gasped as the freezing liquid hit her skin, her clothes tattered and her expression one of dazed exhaustion. A bandaged hand reached down to tilt Kasana's face upward, forcing her to look at her captor. One of the common goblins boasted that he had reserved this prize specifically for his new leader. Lin Tian observed the scene with a cold, analytical detachment. He reflected on the unique biology of his new race, noting that goblin body fluids possessed a specialized paralyzing and stimulating effect on other female creatures. He realized this trait gave his tribe a significant advantage against the matriarchal elves. Kasana's eyes flared with a desperate, aristocratic pride. She spat a verbal jab at Lin Tian, calling him a lowly creature. She questioned how he dared to kidnap a princess of her station and expressed utter disbelief that a monster like him would even attempt to launch a raid against the elven people. Her voice rose to a defiant shout as she claimed he only thought himself tough because of her mother's previous kindness. She insisted that if not for Leah's mercy, the goblin race would have been completely annihilated generations ago. She issued a final, trembling threat, warning that if he touched even a single hair on her head, her mother would hunt him to the ends of the earth. Lin Tian let out a short, mocking chuckle. He stood over her, his silhouette tall and imposing against the night sky. He found the concept of elven kindness deeply amusing, his expression one of dark skepticism as he listened to her boasts. He looked down at the princess, pointing out a glaring contradiction. He noted that the elves she described and the elves his subordinate spoke of seemed to be two very different peoples. He acknowledged that while his goblins might be primitive, they were not capable of the complex deceptions humans and elves practiced. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He reasoned that if the elves truly had the power to wipe out the forest goblins, they would have done so long ago. He recalled Leah's previous command to always leave a few goblins alive and concluded that their survival wasn't a result of mercy, but of a far more sinister purpose. Lin Tian declared that there was no longer any need for further explanation. He stood amidst his warriors, his resolve hardening. He announced his intention to lead the entire tribe that very night to raid the elven sanctuary and uncover the truth behind their kindness. Turning back to his followers, Lin Tian issued a brutal, pragmatic command. He ordered one of the goblins to divide the remains of the other fallen elven scouts among the tribe. He instructed them to devour the meat and absorb whatever skills and power they could from the corpses to prepare for the coming battle. He then turned his predatory gaze back to Kasana, his voice laced with a dark promise. As she begged him to stop, a series of system notifications flooded his vision. The screen announced that Lin Tian had officially reached the level cap of 30. Since his aptitude was now at its peak, the system converted his excess potential into massive boosts for his health, strength, and defense. Most importantly, he acquired the elven skills of stealth and night vision. Deep within the elven sanctuary, the atmosphere was one of hedonistic exhaustion. A male elf leaned against the wall of the matriarch's chambers, breathing heavily and admitting that he could no longer keep up. From within the lush interior, Leah's voice drifted out, suggesting they stop for the night since her special tonic was finally depleted. Leah sat in the dim light, her expression one of petulant frustration. She remarked that it was truly heartbreaking to run out of resources. She mused that if she had known the demand would be so high, she would have captured a far larger number of goblins during their last purge. She looked around the room, realizing someone was missing. She asked the male elf if Kasana had returned from her scouting mission yet. The elf confirmed that the princess had been gone for quite some time, and noted that she should have reported back by now. The male elf approached the divan, his expression serious. He suggested that Leah should send out a war party to investigate. He reasoned that it would also serve as a perfect opportunity to slaughter any lingering goblins and allow the tribe's younger warriors to gain combat experience. Lia sighed, a look of bored calculation on her face. She agreed with the suggestion and commanded him to take a group of warriors into the forest to support Kasana and clean up the remaining pests. Suddenly, a dark, resonant voice echoed through the elven halls, shattering the peace. Lin Tian's voice proclaimed from the shadows that their precious Kasana would not be returning that night. The male elf drew his sword in a panic, shouting a demand to know who was intruding upon their sanctuary. The response was a hail of iron-tipped arrows. Goblins struck from the darkness of the surrounding trees, their newfound stealth and night vision making them invisible to their foes. An elven guard let out a choked cry as a projectile found its mark, the surprise raid beginning in earnest. Lia stood up, her composure vanishing as she saw her warriors falling around her. She gasped in sheer disbelief, unable to fathom that the vermin they had looked down upon were now launching an organized assault on her home. Lin Tian stepped into the light, flanked by his most loyal goblin soldiers. He addressed the matriarch with a wicked grin, informing her that Kasana had already been captured and would soon be carrying his legacy. He mocked the elves, stating that they were all going to become one big, happy family. Rage overcame Lia's shock. She drew a long, elegant blade and lunged at the intruder. Her voice was a venomous snarl as she demanded to know exactly what he had done to her daughter. She threw herself into the attack, her face a mask of murderous intent. She screamed a vow that she would end his life right then and there for his audacity. Lin Tian moved with a speed that blurred his form, easily dodging the matriarch's desperate strike. He taunted her, noting that her entire tribe was now under siege and had no hope of victory. He told her she should surrender obediently, promising that if she did, he might consider treating her with some measure of respect. Lia attempted to pivot for another strike, but her legs suddenly gave way. She collapsed to the floor, her body trembling uncontrollably. She gasped in confusion, realizing that her strength was rapidly deserting her. Lin Tian looked down at her with a smug, knowing expression. He explained that the arrow she had deflected earlier was coated in potent goblin fluids. He warned her that she would be completely paralyzed within moments and advised her to start behaving herself. Lia spat a final curse at him, her body failing her. He knelt beside her, the tip of his blade tracing the line of her throat. He told her that while he was outside, he had overheard their conversation about upgrading warriors with potions made from goblin hearts. He realized the elves had been using his kind as nothing more than livestock and declared that he was there to finally settle the score. Lia looked up at him, a cold realization dawning in her eyes. She whispered a terrified question, wondering if this monster was truly the formidable new leader Kasana had warned her about. Outside, the sounds of slaughter reached a crescendo. Lin Tian's voice boomed a command to his tribe to show no mercy and kill any who resisted. Lia watched through the doorway in horror as her people were overwhelmed. Lin Tian gripped her chin, forcing her to look at the carnage he had wrought. He told her that now that he had her attention, it was time to discuss the terms of their cooperation. The elven village was a vision of hell. Tree houses were engulfed in flames, and the air was thick with the scent of smoke and blood. Goblins swarmed the bridges, dragging elven women and children into the shadows as the once proud sanctuary crumbled into ruin. Lia's face was twisted in a mix of fury and despair. She demanded to know what he had done to her tribe. Lin Tian remained impassive, stating simply that the power dynamic had shifted. He noted that the goblins were no longer the weaker race, and that the elves no longer possessed the strength to resist his will. He justified the violence as a natural cycle of vengeance. He reminded her that when the elves held the power, they slaughtered goblins without a second thought. He told her it was only natural for the oppressed to seek revenge once they had become powerful, and advised her to face the harsh reality of her situation. Lin Tian leaned in close, his voice a low, chilling murmur. He confessed that he required more and stronger warriors for his army, and for that, he still had a use for her. He pressed the cold steel of his blade against her cheek, the threat unspoken but absolute. He looked out over the burning village, where his goblins were already claiming their prizes. He informed Leah that her future, and whether she lived or died, depended entirely on her attitude as the holy mother of her people. The matriarch's spirit finally broke. She collapsed at Lin Tian's feet, clutching at his cloak in a desperate plea. She begged him to spare her children, promising that as long as they were allowed to live, she would do anything he commanded. With tears of shame and desperation streaming down her face, Leah made her final submission. She looked up at her new master and whispered her consent, stating that she was willing to bring her people to him and give birth to his children in order to ensure the survival of what remained of her tribe. In the aftermath of the raid, the once proud elven princess, Kasana, wept bitterly. She looked at her mother, Leah, with eyes filled with despair, calling out to her in a broken voice. Surrounded by the greenery of the forest that was no longer their sanctuary, she asked what their future could possibly hold now that even the matriarch had been captured by the monsters. Leah pulled her daughter close, offering the only comfort she could. She whispered an apology, admitting that the fault was entirely hers. She had gravely underestimated their foes and never expected the goblins to attain a level of strength that so thoroughly surpassed their own. Leah's gaze was hollow as she surveyed the remnants of her people. She observed that the elves were now reduced to a group of unarmed women and children. With a heavy heart, she spoke of a bitter necessity to preserve the elven bloodline and ensure their race did not vanish from the world. They would have to endure a path of procreation with their captors. The encampment became a place of grim transformation. In every corner, the primitive goblins began the process of building their new legacy, claiming the elven women as the foundation for a stronger generation. The air was thick with the sounds of a tribe being forcibly rewritten, a stark contrast to the elegant life the elves had previously known. Standing behind the sturdy wooden bars of a cage, Leah watched the scene unfold with a stoic sadness. She reiterated that from this moment forward, their only hope for survival lay within the structure of the goblin tribe. Kasana could only sob in response, her spirit crushed by the weight of her mother's words. Nearby, Lin Tian stood silently, his back to them, an enigmatic figure orchestrating this new world order. Lin Tian eventually turned to face his royal captives. His expression was cold as he instructed them to remain within their designated area and wait to fulfill their role in the tribe's growth. He promised that he would personally arrange for their meals every day, ensuring they were well tended. However, his voice hardened into a lethal warning. He stated that if anyone harbored ill intentions or attempted betrayal, he would not hesitate to be ruthless and end them all. Leah lowered her head, the golden strands of her hair veiling her face as she whispered her understanding. But she had a single request to make of her new master. Gripping the wooden bars with a sudden intensity, she looked up at Lin Tian and asked if she could be the one to take care of the children that were being born. She claimed that despite everything, they were still her kin. The camp was soon filled with the high-pitched cries of newborns. Lavender-haired goblin children, possessing a strange, hybridized grace, began to populate the clearing. You moved among them with a bright smile, while the tiny creatures played and reached out to the adults. Lin Tian watched from a distance, observing the strange domesticity that was beginning to take root in his monstrous kingdom. Lin Tian's mind hummed with the calculations of his system. He focused on Leah, noticing a rare and powerful trait manifesting within her, boundless maternal love. He grew silent, contemplating the hidden depths of the woman he had conquered and what this attribute meant for the future of his offspring. You approached Lin Tian, looking exhausted as a small goblin child clung to her shoulders. She called his name softly, admitting that the sheer number of infants was becoming too much for her to handle alone. Lin Tian gestured toward Leah, who remained behind the bars. He decided that the matriarch should be the one to assist you, declaring that from now on, she would be responsible for the care of the children. He looked toward the future, noting that when these half-elven children grew up, they would provide a significant and unprecedented boost to the tribe's overall military strength. A surge of digital energy flickered in Lin Tian's vision as he analyzed the results of his union with the Holy Mother. The system chimed with a triumphant notification, congratulating him on gaining a massive qualification boost. His statistics soared, adding 200 points to his health and 30 points to both his strength and defense. He wondered to himself if his potential had already reached its absolute peak, noting that all his recent achievements were being directly converted into raw power. With his hair billowing in a spectral wind and his eyes glowing with an intense, predatory violet light, Lin Tian felt the weight of his new power. He realized that to continue increasing his strength, he simply needed to continue building his legacy with powerful individuals. He felt a dark satisfaction, concluding that his current strength was finally enough to crush Loader. He resolved to find the perfect opportunity to settle the score once the current generation of children was settled. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. The Goblin settlement had expanded into an organized camp with multiple large cages housing the elven captives. The sounds of crying infants echoed through the valley, signaling the rapid growth of Lin Tian's new army. Inside one of the cages, a Goblin Guard held up a squalling newborn. The infant was a strange, green-skinned creature with elven ears, a living testament to the tribe's transformation. Below him, an elven mother lay exhausted on the floor, her breathing shallow as she struggled to recover from birth. The reaction of the other elven women was one of pure horror. One recoiled in disgust, staring at the child and demanding the monster get it away from her. Another wept, claiming she didn't want to mother such a terrifying creature. They were trapped in a nightmare of their own making, unable to see the strength Lin Tian envisioned. Lin Tian walked through the camp with you by his side. He asked her for a progress report on the newborns. You looked thoughtful, estimating that they had already welcomed between 30 and 40 children into the tribe. A sudden, agonizing scream tore through the camp, coming from the princess's quarters. Lin Tian's eyes narrowed with concern as he realized Cassandra was in deep distress. Inside the nursery, Cassandra lay on the ground, her face drenched in sweat and tears. Lian knelt beside her, desperately urging her daughter not to give up and to push harder. Cassandra's voice was a ragged whisper of defeat, claiming she simply couldn't do it anymore. Lian looked up as Lin Tian entered the room, her eyes filled with a mother's desperation. She begged him to save her daughter, noting that it was Cassandra's first time and she seemed to be on the very brink of death. Lin Tian didn't hesitate. He moved forward and commanded them to hurry, instructing them to help position the princess for the birth. Lin Tian knelt at the center of the struggle, his hands steady despite the chaos. Liao watched him with a look of surprise and hope, asking if he truly knew how to assist in such a delicate matter. He responded simply that he knew enough. As Cassandra cried out in a final protest, her voice weak and pleading, Lin Tian silenced her with a firm, authoritative tone. He told her to be quiet and reminded her that the children being born were his as well, and he would not see them or her lost. Moments later, the tension broke. Lin Tian stood up, wiping his hands on a cloth, and calmly stated that everything was all right and she was out of danger. You looked at him with profound admiration, calling him amazing for saving the princess's life. Lin Tian remained stoic, dismissing the feat as no big deal, even as the hybrid children crawled around the recovered Cassandra. The peace was shattered by a high-pitched scream from another part of the camp. An elven girl cried out to be let go, her voice filled with terror. Yu and Lin Tian turned toward the source of the commotion. A group of common goblins had cornered a young elf, their primitive instincts getting the better of them. They cackled with greed, shouting that they wanted to take their turn with her immediately and arguing over who should go first. In a sudden, violent blur, Lin Tian's blade carved through the air. A spray of blood hit the floor as he struck down the most aggressive goblin. He stood over the survivors, his eyes burning with a terrifying crimson rage. He issued a cold, absolute decree. They were to wait until the women were fully rested and recovered before any further attempts at breeding. He promised that anyone who dared to disobey his orders again would face the ultimate consequence, death. The offending goblins cowered on the ground, trembling under his gaze. Lin Tian then addressed the entire group, announcing that from that day forward, every elf in the tribe would be given an extra portion of fruit. He began to implement a system of rewards and discipline to ensure the stability of his new kingdom. Lia stood beside him, her gaze lingering on his face with a new sense of curiosity. She whispered that he truly was different from any ordinary goblin she had ever encountered. Lin Tian looked at her and replied that this was simply how things should be done. He told her that as long as they behaved themselves, they would find their treatment continuing to improve. The system flared to life again, summarizing the successful capture of the elves scenario. It noted that through his efforts, he had conquered the tribe and initiated the birth of a new, high-attribute generation of warriors. A new simulation scenario appeared, Revenge on Loader. The screen depicted Lin Tian infiltrating Bright Town to locate the Blade Hero group. It presented him with 3 options: take action personally to kill Loader, lead the Goblin army to massacre the town, wait and observe for a better opportunity. Lin Tian sat by a campfire, lost in thought. He wondered how they had managed to track him so quickly in his previous life. He acknowledged that while his own strength was now nearly a match for Loader's, the knight's companions were a variable he couldn't ignore. He felt confident that his current attributes should allow him to kill Loader one-on-one. He decided to simulate the first option. The simulation played out. He found an opportunity to ambush Loader alone and struck with decisive force. Loader was nearly killed in the process, but just as victory seemed certain, a new figure appeared, the Sword Saintess of the human race. The simulation ended in tragedy. The Sword Saintess intervened, saving Loader and ending Lin Tian's life with a single, legendary strike. The report noted that soon after, Loader's group returned to the capital and vanished from the region. The summary warned that against the Sword Saintess, there was no chance of escape. He earned 30 life points for the 9-day simulation. Lin Tian stared into the flames, his face a mask of shock and grim realization. He questioned why such a powerful figure as the Sword Saintess would appear in such a small backwater town. He realized with a sense of urgency that if Loader's group left for the capital, he might never find his chance for revenge again. He watched the elves in their cages, his mind racing. He knew he had to act fast before his prey escaped his reach. Yu approached him, carrying a basket of ripe, red apples. She looked at him with a quiet, observant concern, sensing the shift in his mood. Lin Tian stood up, his decision made. He informed Yu that he needed to infiltrate human territory for a few days. He told her that because the warriors of the tribe respected her most after him, he was leaving the entire tribe in her hands. Lia, standing nearby, was shocked, asking if he was crazy. She warned him that if he was discovered by humans in their own lands, he would be hunted like an animal. He looked Lia in the eye, stating plainly that she knew he carried a deep grudge and that revenge was a necessity he couldn't ignore. Lia pleaded with him not to act recklessly. She offered a compromise, suggesting that she could cast a high-level stealth spell on him so he wouldn't be detected by human senses. A sharp, knowing smile spread across Lin Tian's face. He whispered that her offer was exactly what he had been waiting for her to say. Lia raised her hands, a brilliant blue magical aura swirling between her palms. Lin Tian watched with interest, noting how rare it was for her to show such concern for his safety. Lia responded with a cynical honesty, admitting she was only afraid that if he died, the other goblins would become even more cruel to her people. She leaned in, her eyes fixed on his, explaining that her children were all there in the camp. She realized that only if he returned safely would her people truly have a secure future. Lin Tian watched her, thinking to himself that this holy mother certainly knew the cold logic of survival. Draped in a new, dark cloak that seemed to swallow the light, Lin Tian prepared to depart. He raised a hand in a silent farewell to Yu and Lia, who watched him from the cage entrance. He told them he would see them later and promised that he would return very soon, his silhouette fading into the misty woods as he began his hunt. Under a bright, deceptive sky, the wooden sign for Bright Town hung as a beacon of civilization. Yet the atmosphere below was anything but peaceful. On the cobblestone streets, squads of heavily armored knights marched in tight formation, their iron boots echoing against the walls. The town was no longer the relaxed trade hub it once was. It had been transformed into a fortress of paranoia. From the deep shadows of a nearby alley, a pair of sharp, calculating eyes watched the patrol pass. Lin Tian, hidden beneath his heavy traveler's hood, noted the unusual tension. He observed that the town had suddenly become a labyrinth of strict defenses, with patrol teams intersecting at every major corner. The level of security was far beyond what a simple goblin raid would necessitate. Leaning against a rough stone wall, Lin Tian crossed his bandaged arms, his mind racing through possibilities. He wondered if the legendary sword saintess had already arrived, bringing her overwhelming presence to this backwater town. Despite spending the entire day gathering information and blending into the periphery of the crowds, he had yet to hear a single concrete word regarding her whereabouts. He stepped forward cautiously, his movements fluid and silent. He passed by a street vendor's stall where baskets of ripe, red apples were displayed. The vendor offered his wares, but Lin Tian's focus remained elsewhere. He felt a lingering sense of unease, finding the quiet intensity of the town's lockdown to be deeply strange. High above the central square, a grand fountain sprayed arcs of shimmering water into the air, surrounded by a constant flow of nervous citizens and watchful guards. From this vantage point, the town looked orderly, but to Lin Tian, it looked like a trap waiting to be sprung. His path led him toward the town's central notice board, where a crowd of local adventurers had gathered. He pulled his hood lower, moving closer to inspect the parchment pinned to the wood. He realized he was looking at the official adventure team rankings for Bright Town. At the very top of the list, crowned with a golden laurel, was the Blade Hero team, holding a prestigious platinum rank. Right in the center was the portrait of Loader. Lin Tian's expression darkened as he stared at the face of his enemy. He was genuinely surprised to see that Loader had improved so significantly, claiming the #1 spot in the region. Below him were the Silver Rank Bashi and Savior teams, followed by various bronze squads. Lin Tian turned away from the board, walking through the throng of people with a renewed sense of urgency. He knew he needed to find more definitive clues about the Sword Saintess and Loader's next moves. If he failed to understand the full scope of the human forces gathered here, his entire plan for revenge would crumble before it even began. The town's architecture blurred past him as he navigated toward the tavern district. From a 2-story building ahead, a loud, boastful voice spilled out into the street. It was Loader, laughing boisterously and declaring to anyone within earshot that today was his treat, encouraging everyone to drink to their heart's content. Lin Tian froze at the edge of the threshold. He recognized that voice instantly. It was the same arrogant tone that had preceded the slaughter in the cave. A dark, predatory smile spread across his hidden face as he realized he had stumbled upon his prey far sooner than expected. Inside the tavern, the air was thick with the smell of ale and roasted meat. Loader sat at the head of a large table, greedily gulping down a large wooden flagon of beer. He carried himself with the unearned swagger of a man who believed the world was his for the taking. The tavern was filled with Loader's admirers. One local adventurer regaled the room with a story of how he was nearly killed by a monstrous 4-armed ape, only for Captain Loader and Ephraia to arrive just in time to save his life. Ephraia, sitting gracefully beside the captain, added to the praise. She remarked with a charming smile that Loader was truly amazing, claiming that she never could have defeated such a beast on her own. However, not everyone was impressed. An adventurer from the Bashi team sat nearby, nursing his own drink with a look of pure disdain. He scoffed loudly, calling the Blade Hero team ridiculous for having the nerve to brag about killing something as insignificant as a small, four-armed ape. One of Loader's subordinates slammed his hand onto the table, his face twisted in a snarl. He demanded to know what the Bashi team thought they were doing and told them to get lost before things got ugly. Behind him, Loader watched the confrontation with a smug, amused expression, enjoying the tension. The tavern erupted into a chaotic standoff. The Bashi adventurers stood up, challenging them by stating that being part of the high-ranked Blade Hero team wouldn't save them from a beating. Loader's men drew their blades and shields in response, shouting back a challenge to come and try it, and asking who among them was actually afraid of whom. Behind the bar, the bartender continued to wipe down a mug with a weary sigh, ignoring the brawlers. He spoke to a few patrons about a far greater threat, mentioning that the dragons on Dragon Island had entered their breeding season. He detailed how they were now kidnapping livestock and had even begun snatching people from the outskirts of the town. He advised the warriors that if they truly had skills, they should go slay the dragons instead of causing trouble in his establishment. Lin Tian, sitting quietly at the bar with a drink of his own, felt a jolt of interest at the mention of dragons. He listened intently as the bartender continued with a heavy sigh, worrying that if the dragons launched a full-scale attack on Bright Town and reinforcement from the capital didn't arrive, the town would be defenseless. The bartender's voice grew somber as he noted that the local adventurers wouldn't be enough to fend off a dragon horde. He looked out at the room, stating that it felt as though Bright Town was about to be swallowed by a great darkness. The nearby patrons grew silent, the weight of the looming threat finally dampening their spirits. Loader broke the silence with a contemptuous tsh. He dismissed the dragon threat as nothing more than a few lizards, asking what there was to be afraid of. He then revealed his trump card, stating there was no longer a need for secrets. He announced that his master, the Sword Saintess, was already on her way. He promised that once she arrived, they would join forces to slaughter the dragons, rendering the need for capital troops entirely unnecessary. He concluded that once the monsters were dead, his team would return to the capital as heroes alongside the Saintess. The tavern erupted into a feverish excitement. The adventurers were awestruck that Loader had the influence to summon someone as legendary as the Sword Saintess. They began to whisper that if this plan succeeded, Loader would surely become the greatest hero Bright Town had ever seen. Loader stood up, dramatically dropping a heavy bag of gold coins onto the bar. He declared that he would pay for everyone's drinks as a way to celebrate the Saintess's arrival and the guaranteed success of their upcoming hunt. Lin Tian placed his own payment on the counter, his mind working through the new information. He realized that the dragon attack would provide the perfect chaotic backdrop for his revenge. He decided that he had to seize that opportunity when it arose. As Lin Tian turned to leave the tavern, Loader's voice called out from behind him. The captain, still clutching a drink, asked the stranger in the hood why he was leaving so soon and invited him to stay for a few drinks with the rest of the brave warriors. Lin Tian paused at the door, glancing back with a sharp, chilling look from beneath his hood. He declined the offer with a simple, cold no. As he walked out into the night, he thought to himself that there would be many more opportunities for interaction in the future. Loader watched him go, muttering that the hooded man was remarkably strange. The following morning, a festive banner was hung across the main street, officially welcoming the Sword Saintess to Bright Town. Crowds gathered under the blue sky, cheering in anticipation of their divine protector's arrival. Inside the quiet, cavernous halls of the local cathedral, Loader approached a figure kneeling in prayer before the altar. He spoke with a rare tone of deference, informing his master that the dragon had been lingering nearby and was getting closer with each passing hour. He noted that the town was in a state of fear, and it seemed an attack was imminent. The figure rose with a regal, effortless grace. Alice Nia, the Sword Saintess, stood in her gleaming white and gold armor, her blonde hair falling like silk over her shoulders. She looked at Loader with a sharp, demanding gaze, asking how the specific task she had assigned to him was progressing. Loader reported that 10 specialized dragon-slaying crossbows had been constructed according to her blueprints and were currently being deployed at strategic high points throughout the town. Alice issued a stern warning, telling him to ensure they were deployed perfectly. She stated that if his men were of no help when the time came, it would be a personal disgrace to her name. They walked out onto the cathedral's balcony, looking down at the cheering masses. The townspeople were captivated by her noble aura, whispering about her beauty and power. One citizen remarked that he couldn't imagine what kind of man could ever win her heart, while another replied that even the emperor wouldn't dare make a move on someone so untouchable. Alice's eyes swept over the crowds with a look of cold professional detachment. She told Loader that this was a critical period for their mission and demanded that he disperse the citizens immediately. Loader bowed his head, acknowledging her command with a quick, "Yes, master." Suddenly, a shadow fell over the town. A massive, reddish-brown dragon roared as it dove from the clouds, breathing a torrent of fire that ignited the wooden rooftops. It snatched a screaming citizen from the street with its talons. The festive atmosphere turned to pure carnage as people scrambled for cover, shouting in terror that the monster had arrived. From her vantage point, Alice Nia watched the beast with narrowed eyes. She identified it as a scout dragon, knowing that its appearance would inevitably attract the rest of the horde. She drew her sword, the steel singing in the air, and commanded Loader and his companions to follow her to the town walls immediately. High on a cliff overlooking the burning town, a group of mutant goblins watched the chaos unfold. One of them, his skin covered in primitive bark armor, raced toward Lin Tian to report that the dragon had arrived. He noted that the town walls were already teeming with human soldiers preparing for a siege and asked his boss what their next move should be. Lin Tian stood at the edge of the precipice, his tattered cloak snapping in the wind as the sunset painted the sky in shades of blood and fire. Behind him, an army of evolved, half-elven goblin warriors stood in silent, lethal anticipation. He looked down at the burning town where his enemies were gathered and calmly stated that the time was almost here. He told his followers to stay where they were for now, telling them with a dark, satisfied smirk to simply sit back and enjoy the show. The sky over Bright Town was no longer a symbol of hope, but a tapestry of terror. A massive horde of dragons descended from the clouds, their wings blotting out the sun as they circled the city like vultures. From above, the town looked fragile and small, surrounded by the looming shadows of ancient predators ready to tear the walls asunder. The air suddenly hissed as a searing bolt of energy tore through the sky, piercing the chest of one of the lead dragons. The creature let out a pained roar as the light exploded through its hide. Below, Ephraia and Loader stood on the battlements, their expressions frozen in a mix of awe and shock. Even for them, the sheer scale of the conflict unfolding before their eyes was staggering. Alice Nia took command of the chaos. Standing atop the stone ramparts, her white armor reflecting the fire in the sky, she questioned the soldiers on their readiness. She demanded to know if they understood the mechanics of the dragon-slaying crossbows and ordered every man to their stations. The soldiers, galvanized by her presence, shouted their compliance, racing to the massive wooden engines of war. The city walls became a hive of frantic activity. Teams of men worked in unison, the heavy clicking of gears echoing as the loading of the massive projectiles was completed. With the weapons primed and the soldiers at the ready, a grim silence settled over the line, broken only by the whistling wind. The order was barked out. Fire! Huge, glowing bolts of light erupted from the crossbows, streaking into the dark clouds. They struck the dragons with the force of falling stars, carving paths of destruction through the winged formation and lighting up the darkening horizon. A surge of hope rippled through the defenders as they watched the dragons fall. One soldier cheered, remarking that the power of the dragon-slaying crossbows was as amazing as the legends promised. However, the celebration was short-lived. His comrade's face went pale as he urged everyone to look up, sensing a shift in the very atmosphere. The sky itself seemed to bleed. Deep purple clouds swirled violently, illuminated by jagged strikes of unnatural lightning. The sheer pressure of the gathering magic made the townspeople collapse, clutching their heads in agony. They cried out in terror as the world groaned under the weight of something ancient and terrible approaching from the heavens. Loder stared into the brewing storm, his bravado finally crumbling into pure dread. He looked toward his master, Alice Nia, but found no comfort in her expression. Both recognized the sign of a power far beyond the common drakes they had been fighting. Through the veil of lightning and shadow, the purple golden dragon mother emerged. Her size was incomprehensible, a mountain of scales and malice that made the city walls look like toys. Loder whispered her name in horror, identifying the legendary king of Dragon Island. Alice Nia didn't hesitate, screaming for her men to prepare to shoot, even as the adventurers around them lamented that the gap in power was too great. Their legendary crossbows wouldn't even be able to scratch her. The dragon mother's eye, a glowing slit of golden fury, focused on the puny weapons arrayed against her. She didn't roar. She simply gathered a blinding brilliance within her throat. The air began to vibrate as she unleashed a titanic pillar of fire, a concentrated beam of solar heat that descended toward the town like the finger of a god. The impact was catastrophic. The golden flames washed over the town wall, melting stone and vaporizing anything in its path. Soldiers and civilians alike screamed in a panic-stricken chorus, realizing the defenses were about to collapse. They fled in every direction as the very foundations of the city began to crumble. Amidst the inferno, Alice Nia remained an island of calm. She planted her feet firmly on the stone, her eyes narrowed in concentration as a brilliant blue magic circle manifested beneath her boots. She commanded everyone to remain calm and hold their ground. She drew her blade, the steel humming with a resonant power. She declared that the Dragon Mother was her responsibility alone. Invoking advanced sword techniques, she prepared to meet the dragon's fury head-on, ordering the rest of the survivors to focus solely on defending what remained of the city. Alice Nia unleashed her sword chi torrent. A massive, swirling vortex of blue energy erupted from her blade, clashing with the dragon's pillar of fire. The two forces met in a blinding explosion of light and sound, creating a shimmering shield of pure will that held back the impending annihilation. From the safety of a distant cliff, Lin Tian watched the spectacle with a mixture of surprise and calculation. He admitted he hadn't expected the human Saintess to actually be capable of holding off such a devastating attack. Beside him, his evolved goblin warriors watched the destruction of the human city with quiet intensity. Lin Tian's system analyzed the titan in the sky. The purple golden dragon mother was revealed as a level 79 ancient dragon, a creature of nearly 3,000 combat power. Her stats were astronomical, her titles confirming her as the absolute ruler of her kind. Lin Tian's gaze shifted to the woman standing on the wall. He acknowledged that while the dragon was a force of nature, Alice Nia was a true monster in her own right. He felt a bead of sweat roll down his face, recognizing the sheer danger she represented. The system scanned Alice Nia, revealing her as a level 80 sword saint. Her combat power was an incredible 4,000, surpassing even the Dragon Mother. She moved like a blur of white light, cutting through the lesser dragons with effortless, lethal grace. Lin Tian noted to himself that her strength was abnormal, realizing that facing her directly would be a fatal mistake. The Saintess surged into the air, her blade piercing a clean hole through the Dragon Mother's wing. Lin Tian analyzed the matchup, noting that while the Dragon Mother was technically slightly weaker in skill, her massive health pool gave her a significant advantage in a battle of attrition. He watched as the two titans traded blows that shook the earth. He concluded that the Saintess wouldn't be able to achieve a quick victory. The battle would be long, exhausting, and, most importantly for him, distracting. A dark, predatory grin spread across Lin Tian's face. He realized this was the perfect opportunity he had been waiting for. He addressed his army, stating that the time for revenge against humanity had finally arrived. He ordered them to proceed into the city as planned, dividing them into two groups, one to create a distraction and the other to lie in wait for an ambush. His followers, a legion of red-eyed, armored goblin hybrids, shouted their loyalty. They stood silhouetted against the lightning-scarred sky, a new nightmare ready to descend upon the already wounded bright town. The city was a vision of hell. Fire consumed the buildings, and smaller dragons continued to swoop through the smoke. In the distance, an arrow hissed through the air, signaling the start of the second invasion. Loder stood over a smaller dragon carcass, his chest heaving with exertion. He muttered about how difficult the flying beasts were to handle, but his arrogance remained intact. He boasted that they were fortunate to have his master's help and declared that he was now a dragon slayer himself, entirely oblivious to the shadow closing in on him. Suddenly, a new wave of screams erupted from the streets. Citizens fled in terror, crying out that goblins were invading from within the city walls. Loder's triumphant expression vanished, replaced by a mask of confusion and rising anger. Loder stood over a fallen comrade, his eyes wide with disbelief. He barked at the fleeing survivors to stop joking, insisting that even the most foolish of goblins wouldn't dare show their faces in a human stronghold. The reality of the situation hit him as he looked down the street. Goblins were leaping over fences and through windows, dragging people into the flames. The lowly creatures were no longer running. They were hunting with a terrifying, organized efficiency. Loder cursed, his teeth bared in a snarl. He noted that only a few dragons remained in the sky and ordered two of his men to hold them off. He turned to Freya, commanding her to come with him so they could personally deal with the goblin trash polluting their town. They raced down a narrow cobblestone alley, their boots echoing against the walls. Loder's face was twisted in a manic grin, his hatred for the monsters fueling his stride. Below them, hidden beneath the iron grates of the town's sewers, pairs of glowing red eyes watched their every move. A goblin let out a soft, guttural chuckle, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The trap was sprung in an instant. A heavy net shot up from the shadows, ensnaring Freya before she could react. She screamed for help as she was dragged toward the ground. Loder was swarmed by a horde of goblins that seemed to rise from the very earth, their numbers overwhelming his defenses. He gasped in shock, wondering how there could possibly be so many of them within the city walls. One of Loder's loyal adventurers saw his captain fall and rushed forward, blade drawn. He shouted that he was coming to help, desperate to break the goblin line and save his leaders. Lin Tian materialized behind the charging adventurer like a ghost. Loder, pinned to the ground, could only watch in horror. He screamed a warning for his man to watch his back, but it was already too late. A fountain of blood erupted into the air as Lin Tian's blade carved through the air with surgical precision. The adventurer didn't even have time to scream before he collapsed. Loder and Freya stared at the hooded figure, their eyes wide with a terror they hadn't felt even when facing the dragons. Lin Tian stepped over the body, his tattered cloak billowing in the heat of the nearby fires. He looked down at his former captors with a cold, mocking gaze. He noted that he hadn't expected them to be caught so easily, his voice dripping with a lethal amusement. Loder, despite being held down, roared a defiant threat. His face was flushed with a mix of humiliation and rage as he vowed to kill every last one of the lowly goblins for this insult. Lin Tian didn't answer with words. He slammed his boot onto Loder's chest, the force of the blow driving the air from the knight's lungs. He leaned over him, his eyes glowing with a sinister purple light, and advised Loder to look at the reality of his situation before he wasted any more breath on empty threats. He turned to his warriors, his voice commanding and absolute. He ordered them to take the two precious captives out of the city through the sewers. He then looked toward the city walls, declaring that the rest of the tribe would follow him to deal with the remaining crossbowmen and ensure the humans had no way to fight back. High above on the battlements, Alice Nia paused. Her keen ears caught the sounds of the internal struggle. She looked back at the burning town, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. She wondered how the goblins had managed to coordinate a surprise attack at the exact moment the city was most vulnerable. A sudden surge of magical power drew her attention back to the sky. The massive dragon mother began to glow, her colossal form shrinking and shifting. Lightning crackled around her as she transformed into a demi-human form, a woman of dark, lethal beauty with horns and glowing amber eyes. She looked at Alice Nia with a jagged, predatory smile and mockingly remarked that the humans seemed quite busy among themselves. She addressed her rival with a chilling respect, calling her the human sword saint. The two true powers of the battlefield were finally face to face.
Mira.